It looks like we're good to go. So welcome everyone. I'll hand over to Jackie if you're there, and then leave it up to Vanessa to kind of take us through the presentation. Jackie, have you got audio? Maybe not.
You're on mute, Jackie. It's a classic Zoom thing to do.
Yeah. But I feel like it's...
myself.
Oh, there we go. Okay, handing over to Jackie.
Kia ora, good morning. Welcome, everyone. Looks like it's a lovely day down in Wellington where Vanessa is. Welcome, Vanessa. Vanessa's just taken over the role of CEO of Irrigation New Zealand. And so we're really thrilled that she could come along and give us an idea of what Irrigation New Zealand are doing, what's their focus and their strategy. And so welcome, Vanessa. I'll put the floor over to you.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you for inviting me. I actually know a lot of you, so this is going to be a little weird for me because I would often sit on the other side. I haven't prepared in terms of any PowerPoint slides or anything like that, Jackie. I was just going to do more of a a brief on what I do and what irrigation does, and a little bit about myself. Is that all good? Sweet. My Vanessa Winning. I actually have a background in comms and marketing myself. I am a recently appointed CEO of Irrigation New Zealand, so I joined in late October last year, and I think that Wellington is fooling us because actually, even though the sun is streaming in my new office, it is freezing cold out there, and Lee will be giggling at this. We've had 2 days of the most horrendous weather. One day it was warm and a northerly, and I'm pretty sure that none of us could stand up straight. And then yesterday it was a southerly and it was blowing the completely opposite way. And today the sun is out, but it is cold. So it's kind of one of those weather options that you get used to eventually, I'm told. And I'm still, not used to it. But it's been kind of a baptism by fire, and you learn very quickly not to wear a skirt to work. So just a little bit of background about me. So I'm actually an ex-banker, almost 20 years in banking, HSBC, ANZ National Bank, focus on commercial, corporate, institutional banking with agricultural organisations with HSBC, but then more in the farming kind of sector, and more diving into agriculture with ANZ National Bank. So I was responsible for the brand change for the agri portfolio when National Bank merged into ANZ. So that was a really big opportunity and quite a big thing to be involved in at the time. During that year, I also did the Escalator Program, which a couple of you have done, and it's an organizational kind of change. When you go through the Escalator Program, you become part of a really awesome network of women across the country involved in agriculture, either in a supporting role or a business role or on farm. And so you meet some amazing women, and basically you create this network across the country of people that you can tap into every now and again and ask them to support you. So this week, I've had 2 of those occasions. So Jackie asking me to do this today. So Jackie's also an Escalator woman. And earlier in the week, I presented on behaviour change and just, managing change with Merck Sharp and Dome with their takeover of the Allflex business and the merge of that's coming about on the 1st of July. So, you do get engaged in a whole bunch of different things with Escalator, and I think if any of you women on this group have considered it, I go ahead and do it, because it's well worth investing in you and in your time to join that particular cohort. So then I left banking and took a little bit of time out. I actually did some consulting for NZX Agri for about a year with Tony and Jackie involved there. And then during that year, also did some consulting for the Heart Foundation, the Parenting Place, and also a small amount for AWDT. And then IrrigationNZ tapped me on the shoulder and asked me to join them in a comms and marketing role. So I joined IrrigationNZ in 2015 and had 5 years with them. So comms and marketing ended up being merged with the extension and product teams. And so went from, I think I had about 25 staff in the comms and marketing area, and then it grew to about 130 across the country. And about a third of the investment that IrrigationNZ makes in terms of behaviour change activities. Loved my time at IrrigationNZ, loved working directly with farmers and supporting change and helping, and just grew so much in terms of knowledge around what they were trying to achieve and how difficult that was and all the things that you can do to support. And so I had an amazing staff, some awesome people, some really intelligent, talented people that I was working with, and some amazing farmers. And so, just absolutely loved being part of what they were up to and that change. So yeah, that was awesome. And so left there in towards the end of June last year, and did some contract work for Federation of Māori Authorities, and then joined Irrigation New Zealand in late October. So Irrigation New Zealand is a membership organisation, so we have about 3,800 now members across the country. We probably have about half of the irrigated hectares in New Zealand as members, and it's a voluntary membership. And people join us to get training and to improve on-farm management of the irrigation systems, also to get services and tools, but more latterly, more in that advocacy space. So when I started, we moved the organisation to Wellington, and so we have a little base here. I've just appointed a principal technical officer, Stephen McNally, who's sitting in the office next to me, and we are just in the throes of a junior policy person as well, and that will be us based in Wellington. And then we have a comms person currently in Christchurch, and our commercial manager is in Timaru. And then we use quite a lot of consultants, and we're a small organisation. We don't have a lot of ability to have in-house staff, but we do, we have an amazing sector and some really passionate people who support us to achieve the things that we're trying to achieve. In terms of a kind of a day job, my days change every day. I am engaged in quite technical activity that I'm learning very quickly, all the way through to meeting with ministers and attending activities that, in terms of the advocacy kind of stuff. Lots of policy submissions. We get pulled in lots of ways, and and Lee Catley, I see that you're on here, is in a similar boat. So much is going on, and if I just think about water, we've got 4 different departments of government that we work with. We've got MB, MFE, MPI, and the Department of Internal Affairs, and so they all have an impact on our irrigators, what we can do, how that works, and also any new rules and regulatory changes. And right now, every one of those departments is doing something that has an impact from a policy perspective. And so just yesterday, we had a briefing, my board and I, with Minister Parker on in the morning, and which was an excellent meeting. Actually, really enjoyed just the I guess the commentary in terms of he was very open about what was going on. He understood how many things were all happening at once, and I think there is a real appreciation coming a sense of understanding that there is so much all up in the air at the moment that is looking to land, and from an implementation perspective could be, quite contradictory in some cases to each other. And so, that overarching, what is it that we're trying to achieve as a country, really it still hasn't landed, I don't think, yet. I think there's still, departments are working on their own activity with their own outcomes in mind. And so, we are pushing, like many are in our sectors, to try and get some consistency, but also, really get an understanding of what is the outcome that we're looking to do. And, as soon as we can do that, we all know farmers are very adaptable and willing to change. They need to know what is going on and how it impacts them and what they can do. And I think at the moment that's a little bit still up in the air, and as I say, so much change all at once is very unnerving. So that's kind of what I would do in a day, would be from all of that stuff all the way through to managing a small team and paying payroll and the normal kind of day-to-day office job type stuff, through to presenting on something or putting out press releases and doing submissions. So it's a pretty full-on role, and there's only, as I say, there's only just a few of us, so we're pretty nimble and pretty responsive. And our membership goes all the way through to the really large schemes, such as MHV, CPW in Canterbury, in terms of those huge schemes, versus through to individual irrigators who might have a small plot of land that they're irrigating their apples or other hort on. So it is quite a wide and varied membership base. We also have suppliers, so we've got those organisations that are engaged in design and implementation of systems, all the way through to, as I say, those big corporates. And so, it's been a bit of a baptism of fire really quickly, because we came out of COVID in a pretty precarious kind of situation. We would normally have a big conference every 2 years, and we kind of relied on that income coming in. And so coming in October, we've really had to go back to the basics and really understand what our members were wanting to do, and pull that back a bit, and also decrease the reliance on the number of the team that we had. So we've been through a lot in the last year, and it feels like we're really coming out the other side. And it also feels like we're coming out the other side with policy and an understanding that water is a significant enabler for New Zealand, in order to achieve what we're trying to achieve in terms of land use change, but also from a climate mitigation opportunity, and also an opportunity to reduce our climate impacts. So, I think there is a better understanding now of the positives of irrigation maybe than say even 18 months ago, and it's a good place to be, and a fascinating industry to be part of. So I think on a personal level, I have two amazing young women who are my daughters, who I don't get to see very often because I'm always on the road. But I have a gorgeous daughter, Alex, who's in the customers team at New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. So she's, done 2 degrees and 4 majors, and she now works for the government, well, quasi-government, I guess. And then I've got Charlie, my amazing young 16-year-old, who's very cool and keeps her mum grounded. So I do, when I do get to get home to Auckland, because I am an Aucklander, I'm very lucky to have some quite cool kids who just make sure that they remind me that I'm a parent first. I'm also on the board of Surf Life Saving New Zealand, so I've got quite a bit of interest in water in lots of different ways. Yeah. So Jackie, I'll open it up, I guess. You're on mute again, darling.
I didn't know whether that was me or Sarah muting me, so I didn't say anything inappropriate. Thank you, Vanessa. That's really interesting. I've actually already learned a few things about your membership and who the members are and what your kind of remit is. If there's any questions people might like to chat them in, maybe I could start off with, just from my point of view, not knowing that much about the irrigation industry, how much sort of crossover or input ability to discuss water do you have with the nation's other big water users? I'm thinking of other water extractors for industry or municipal use and that sort of thing. Is that part of your remit as well, kind of working with them? Because I guess the countrywide conversation about water goes further than just irrigation for agriculture and horticulture, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. And so that's where activity with MB really comes in. So we have some work going on, for example, in the dam space. So NZ Sold and MB and Infrastructure New Zealand, and also the Engineering New Zealand as well. And so whenever it has an water for drinking purposes, we do get impacted, and so therefore we do, as I said earlier, we get pulled into quite a few different conversations, and some of them may even be unintended consequences of policy or change that might be going on that then impact on our irrigators. And so we have to be available to be part of those conversations. And at the moment the water services bill is up for discussion, and that's really trying to fix our drinking water in New Zealand. And while the impact on farms where you might have just like you might only be supplying your dairy shed, for example, but you get pulled into this conversation because you become a water supplier. So there are things that are going on that, while they're not directly irrigation specific, they do then impact on our membership base. And so our role is to really support those changes, but at the same time make sure that they're practical in their implementation. We all want clean, healthy water to drink, and so the intentions are good. It's just sometimes when you're looking at it from a district council perspective, that's a sorry, there's someone talking. That's a big impact when it comes to implementation on a farm, for example. So yes, we've got links into Water New Zealand, we've got links into Infrastructure New Zealand, Engineering New Zealand, New Zealand Sold, which is the big dams. And we get involved in MB stuff and Department of Internal Affairs stuff because of just the fact that a lot of our schemes, for example, are supplying water for hydroelectricity reasons and for supply of drinking water as well as productive use. And I think that will be the model more likely to go ahead in the future as well, where instead of it being capture and storage just for the purposes of productive land change or productive use, it will be more a holistic approach from a community perspective, where you're going to have more community water, more community drinking water requirements. And also, especially as we go, try and reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, the impact on, from a electricity perspective is, I think James Shaw's estimated it at 170% of our current use, of our current supply. And the only way we really can do that is through hydro. There is some room we can probably make with wind and solar, but really, we are the land of the long white cloud for a reason. Relying on solar is a little bit risky, and while we have very windy components of the country, it's probably again not as ongoing as some other countries. And so that mix between solar, water, and wind is going to be even more important as we move toward a decarbonisation of our country. And so I think to your point, Jackie, we are engaged in lots of different areas that are not necessarily about irrigation specifically. And just to also point out, our irrigators are not just productive use, so they're not just farm or orchard specific. It's also, we also have a number of stadia who are significant users of irrigation. The recent introduction at Eden Park with Watercare's support of their new irrigation system, those guys are members. A lot of golf courses and a lot of district councils who use irrigation for particular parks and that sort of parks and recreation. So we're actually not, we're a little bit wider than I think that most people probably are, probably realise.
No, that's interesting. Thanks, Vanessa. Now, Sarah's put a question up. Access to water is huge for horticulture. Like in Gisborne, it's really limiting how productive the land can be. How does Irrigation New Zealand work in these areas to educate as well as campaign?
Yeah, we've got a perception issue, and I think this is an agriculture-wide concern. And there has been quite a lot of really amazingly well-targeted sound bites used in the past, and so a lot of people still have that impression that water is for dairy or water is for more cows, and that is unfortunate. There are definitely pockets where irrigation is specific for dairy farming, but the vast majority of dairy farming is not, does not do so under irrigation, whereas rightfully, as Sarah points out, if you are wanting to grow fruit and veggies, you do need a reliable source of water, more so than if you are growing, cows and sheep and producing milk or meat. So there are lots of places, and especially on the East Coast, East Cape, where unfortunately the investment in water infrastructure has been lacking, and I think New Zealand-wide infrastructure has been an issue for many years, and so if you go up to Kerikeri, for example, they put in their Kerikeri irrigation put in their system, I'm going to say 40 years ago. I'm probably a decade out either side, but around about 40 years ago, and that water is why you can get amazing mandarins and citrus all year round, and you can get incredible kiwi fruit growth, which is up there going on at the moment. And Palmer were in the middle of replanting a dairy farm into a massive, and I'd say massive, avocado plantation, and I'm calling it a plantation because it's way bigger than any orchard I've ever seen. And so you really need that reliable source of water in order to be able to produce fruit and veggies. And I think we have a duty as an organisation to change that perception. And you'll see any comms that I put out, it's more about capture and storage, that we really need capture and storage right now. There is definitely opportunity to improve precision use of what on the farms. We've got the water to the farm, but really we need massive investment in capture and storage. And even if I look at, as an Aucklander, we're at, I think I read the other day, 46% of our dam storage at the moment. And, normally we'd be closer to 80%. And we're going to go, we're still under restrictions. I think we've been under water restrictions now for 2 years. And that impacts on the pukekohe growers, their ability to take water in terms of, cabbages and potatoes and other vegetables. And I think there is a lot of work that my organisation can do to change that conversation and improve the understanding that if we really want to grow our fruit bowl and improve, especially on the East Coast, East Cape, Hawke's Bay is another one, Marlborough, another area, Nelson Bay's another area that's low on water. And there's pockets throughout the country. We're just going to have to spend some money and get that infrastructure in place and do it in a way that's a holistic community approach rather than just for productive use.
Yeah. So Sarah's put another question, but maybe just moving on from what you've said, Simon's got a good one. Is there any improvement in the current government's attitude, willingness to co-invest in capture and storage? And I was going to ask one like that too. There seemed to be a move away from the willingness of government to help fund the biggest schemes and kind of a move towards more on-farm capture and farmers doing their own thing. But do you see any change in the current government's attitude to that more wholesale capture and storage?
I think as understanding of the need grows, that we're seeing a move. And I think, I guess what the concerns have been in the past is that if government investment is then used for personal wealth creation, there seems to, that doesn't go that well with government. And most governments, it's not just, the current government, most governments are not happy to increase taxpayers, a contribution into something that then has a personal benefit for a very small amount of people. And so what we're seeing is that if there is a wider community use, there's a drinking water concern, there is an improvement, especially from an iwi perspective. So there's a lot of underutilized Māori land because they either haven't had access to water, or they haven't had, they've had the assets, but they haven't had the ability to use those assets to invest in water capture. And so what we're seeing is actually a move away from, some of those bigger schemes, I think will be harder to get across the line unless there is a very good hydro or community drinking water component to them. And definitely if there is a improvement for Māori outcomes, then I think those bigger schemes will actually get more support. But what we are definitely seeing, and to Simon's point, we're seeing a lot more of those smaller schemes or multi-site type schemes are getting support. And just this last 6 months, I've seen a real improvement in terms of the discussion that central and local government are having with new and smaller type schemes across the country. There's no question that we need more water storage and capture. If we can improve that, we can actually improve the environmental outcomes of our rivers as well. And so I think there is now more of an understanding that the two things are linked instead of being in competition with each other. That is definitely improving. There's still more, terrible pun, but more water to go under that bridge, because seriously, there has been a lot of difficult kind of conversations over the last few decades and that perception, as I said earlier, does need to still keep improving. And so I think, if you look at Northland, for example, Tai Tokoro Water got approval under COVID, so they got a small amount of MB funding under the old PGF, whatever that regional growth fund was called, and now they've got a loan from MB to help support them in terms of the development component. So each part of that loan they then pay back to get that next piece, and that's mainly because, as I said before, in terms of Māori land, they haven't got the ability to borrow off that land because it's not in the same titles as European land. And so if the banks were asked to lend, it becomes a much more difficult conversation to have. So you'll see more and more of those sorts of opportunities coming up, and I know of 3 or 4 that are being discussed with government at the moment.
Oh, that's great. Now, Sarah's other part of her question kind of works quite well in here. How much is the Waitangi Tribunal report on freshwater understood by your members?
I think it depends on the member and how engaged they are in the policy and frameworks. But I think you'll see that the larger schemes have got quite a good understanding of what this means, versus maybe some of the more independent irrigators who probably don't. There's a lot of work there that is still required to be done by central government and under their own treaty obligations. And I think we're actually all, in lots of ways, we're all trying to achieve the same thing, but in a different, maybe in a different time frame and with slightly different ways of going about it. But I definitely think my organisation understands it, and most of our schemes really do understand it and work really well with iwi. And so, it's our intention to have a memorandum of understanding with the Federation of Māori Authorities, and this year to really actually tease out some of those issues and work together in a proper partnership. And I think, as I said before, there is such an underutilisation of the land that is available for Māori to grow their their iwi hapu's wealth in long-term sustainable ways, that I think there's actually real opportunity for both our members and iwi and hapu to join better together and get better outcomes together.
Great, thank you. Now, Lee's asked, what sort of barriers are there to getting a small scheme up and running, a small irrigation scheme?
It depends on where it is, and it depends on the cultural nature of the site that you might be using. It also depends on, you know, who's taken, if it's something within a riverbed, you know, what takes available. It's very specific to each area, and it's kind of, and I think that's really important to understand, that it's not like a one size fits all approach. The consenting part, you know, you have to go through just like you do when you're doing a conversion of farm or land use, especially if you're moving into an area where it's potentially going to have more environmental impact. You have to go through the normal consent process. The larger it is, the more likely you are to get, you know, probably more of the activism against it, and so, you know, you will end up in the likes of environment courts in some cases, but, you know, some of the things that government are doing at the moment are, you know, putting in place ways to get around that. And so the Taitokoro scheme, for example, under COVID rules, didn't have to go through the normal RMA process. It was approved under COVID. It took I want to say 39 days, but again, I might be a few days out, but a very short period of time to go from plans in place to consenting. But the rules around those consents are just as onerous if they'd gone through an RMA process. It just meant it was a lot faster, and the implementation is able to be done in a quicker way. So I think it really does depend on what the impact of the scheme, no matter how big it is, it has. And I think what we'll see moving forward is that dams are going to be more regulated, impacts on existing river levels and river impacts are going to be more regulated. You're also going to have what are the opportunities for community drinking water, and if that hasn't been taken into account, how are you going to negate that? And then, of course, more and more, what's the cultural impact, what's the iwi impact, and how do you ensure that you're supporting what their cultural, you know, benefits are, but also that you are aware of the stream and you know, the understanding that the stream or the river comes first. When it comes to building new capture, and so not necessarily being about the river, I think what we'll find is that there'll be more of that happening, and where it can have a positive impact on the river, which means, you know, you're doing something where you're taking away the need to use that body of water. I think we'll find that those are going to have an easier consent process than where you're actually impacting on existing bodies of water. So yeah, sorry Lee, I can't be more specific. It really just depends. Yeah.
Oh, cool. That seems to be the end of the questions. I'm trying to think of what else we could cover. Do you? I guess the RMA and the sort of the unbundling of it potentially to happen. Do you see that as a positive for the irrigation industry, or do you think there'll be other checks and balances?
Yeah, look, I guess sorry. I guess we're just going to have to wait, really, aren't we? Because if you think about the RMA itself, the law itself probably wasn't necessarily the issue. It was more how it was implemented, and I think it's always the case. You know, I don't think anyone does anything or puts policy or legal frameworks in place to make it worse. I think they genuinely have a belief that what they're doing is the right thing to do. It's just sometimes practical implementation doesn't always win out, and I think we'll just have to wait. But anything that improves our impact on the climate, I think will be something that will get a little bit better or faster approval process through the RMA than perhaps had been in the past. And I think that maybe what will end up happening is there'll be things that will go through in a faster way. I'm hopeful anyway. I mean, it can't get any slower, surely.
No. I guess the last thing I was going to ask about was I guess you're doing a lot of, well, you'd be over the work on how the climate's changing. Do you have a sort of a feel for what that's going to mean for the irrigation industry in terms of how faster we need to go in terms of getting more capture and storage as the years go by?
Look, I think from, purely from a selfish perspective, this is a real opportunity. Water is an enabler. As Sarah pointed out, how do we grow more fruit and veggies without water? You can't. And so I think what we'll find is that there will be a speeding up of the process around, especially where you can demonstrate that it's going to improve our ability to grow trees, have more fruit and veggies in land that's probably marginal at the moment and probably shouldn't be necessarily a dairy farm or a sheep and beef farm, and then you're going to have water storage that hopefully will also de-risk us from the climate change that's already happening. And what I see is more and more extremes in weather, and so when you get those extremes, if you can't store or capture that water that's flowing through, when we're getting huge dumps of rain, whatever, or huge dumps of snow, if we can't capture that to use when it's getting even more extreme and dry, then we're not being very efficient. And I think what we'll see is more of that will happen, and therefore I think it will speed up. There's already conversations about new dam opportunities in the Otago area, and those kind of things haven't been discussed for for at least the last 4 years. And I think as the understanding of how important water is as an enabler for not just for hydroelectricity removal of fossil fuels, but also for changing land into land use that's deemed more climate friendly, I guess, for a better word, that will just get some more momentum, I think, and especially in those really dry areas, such as the East Coast and East Cape.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Vanessa. That's been great, and thanks for agreeing for us to capture this and put it on YouTube, because I'm sure there'll be other members of the Guild who'd like to get in and have a listen to it. So thanks.